recorders.
Yes.
We are recording. Bring the Public Safety Committee to order. Apologize for being late. We had a very packed agenda at the prior homelessness meeting. Transition took a little while longer than usual. This is about drones, sort of two very different aspects of the emerging field of drones, and about the Public Safety Advisory Commission. I know there was some very interesting, hot, excited testimony on the Homelessness Committee. After this, we're having, starting at 2, a joint meeting of both the Homelessness and Public Safety Committee to consider homeless camp abatement changes, particularly moving from 15 days to 10, but also others. And so those of you who are here, particularly on homelessness issues, can do something else until 2 o'clock. Of course, you're perfectly welcome to stay here if your interests go both on the homelessness issue and on those two issues that I discussed, and that we'll discuss now, drones and the Public Safety Advisory Commission. Introductions, maybe starting with Mr. Dunbar.
Forrest Dunbar.
Suzanne LeBrance.
Brett Dyson.
John Weddleton.
Christopher Constant.
Felix Rivera.
Dave Training.
Amy Demboski.
Tim Stain. Eric Croft.
Pete Peterson.
Dean Gates.
Kevin Vandegrift, APD. Justin Bell, APD. Mark Pilsketter, APD.
And if there's no objection, I would like to change the order to start with drones. I don't think I need a technical motion as we do when we're in full meetings, but to start with item D on drones. There are two aspects of drones that I wanted to bring before the Public Safety Committee. One is that there was a very recent federal proposal, really. It came out on October 30th. I printed it in up front in the Federal Register, so the regulation section of the federal documents, and the president has invited a pilot program on other jurisdictions taking control of drone maintenance. Now that obviously was FAA's job and has a lot of potential for interference with flights. That's why it had been FAA's. But this is an opportunity, an interesting opportunity that kind of, at least from my perspective, who've been interested in this issue but not deeply involved, came kind of out of nowhere. It's asking for a limited number of pilot programs. The university apparently has submitted, University of Alaska has submitted an application. The mayor is considering one, and I wanted the assembly to be educated up on it. There's not a whole lot to know yet. It's really moving quickly. So it's both just came out. It's a memorandum of October 25th. The date of the formal publication is October 30th, and there's a 90-day period to get these things in. So it's we don't know a lot, and we're on a short time frame to do something. But in many ways, Anchorage and Alaska are uniquely positioned for use of drones in the sense that it can make a whole lot more sense to send a drone out to look at a pipeline path or a electrical line or all kinds of things in our sparsely populated state, and then send the people just where you find the problem instead of having somebody having to hike that line. And many, many other uses, some of which are common to the rest of the United States, some of which we're cutting edge or unique on. So, and then APD has a proposal how it might use drones, a proposed draft policy. And that's within the current structure. That's right. Whatever we do on this, it'd be within every law we have now. And those are very different things. I think they got melded, and I didn't really separate them out the way I should have on the agenda. But I'd like to propose that we have a short presentation on what we know about this new presidential pilot program, and we don't know a whole lot. Then we hear from APD about their current proposal on drones, and we figure out how we feel about that and ask questions. And then thirdly, we'll be talking to the Public Safety Advisory Commission. There are commission members here, and we have two different drafts of two different approaches to sort of revitalize and support that commission. Any objections to proceeding in that manner? I ask because I know him and know to be very involved in sort of him on the cutting edge of this cutting edge issue, Mr. Ryan Marlowe of Alaska Aerial Media, who does a lot of private work in drones, to just tell us a little bit. And I'll ask, I reached out to the FAA, but some people are out and stuff, so I'll have more for you from other people. But maybe, Ryan, can you just tell us where you think this came from and what some of the opportunities are for Alaska?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Ryan. I am the CTO at Alaska Aerial Media. We provide a lot of the oil and gas companies and federal entities here in Alaska with unmanned solutions, operating down to -50 in the rain, snow, all throughout the state. The main push for this UAS pilot program is because the FAA is getting backlogged. We have almost 60,000 operators that are filing about 20 requests apiece. And with that, we are getting almost a 1-year wait period to get anything done. So airspace waivers, overhead flight operations, night waivers, all of these which are required for drones to operate legally. Here in Anchorage, we have a Class D airspace, we have a Class C airspace. We are very convoluted with airspace. You actually need waivers to operate in this. And a lot of people don't know that. We have operators that are buying systems off the shelf and operating in our airspace. But now with that being said, the reason why this initiative has come out is there's been so much complaint and push from these tech developers and software developers for faster processes and the ability to actually test these systems in real-time environments. So with Alaska here, we make a perfect example because of what we have here. We have lots of FAA involvement. We have lots of local companies. We have a parachute company here that builds parachutes for drones. We just certified them with FAA down in Virginia Tech last week. So we are all working towards standards so that we can start operating these systems overhead. Now, currently, it is under Part 107, I should say, is illegal to fly systems overhead beyond line of sight. Now, with that being said, a person out here on the park strip cannot fly a system into town without having a Class D waiver, an overhead operation waiver, a registered system, all of those things which FAA has not currently allowed anybody to do it except one company, CNN. Now, of course, they have great lawyers, but what the program is allowing is for state entities, tribal governments, local municipalities, is to file for case scenarios and actually test these systems out. So Anchorage, of course, we'd be testing for beyond line of sights, the ability to use systems at night, routine operations, all of these things. Eric mentioned the pipeline. There's great interest in automatically in setting routine flights with unmanned systems down the pipeline. Removing that human element from the risks of monitoring and anomaly detection. The big one that we've been dealing with FAA is if you are a current UAS pilot, dealing with air traffic control is a nightmare. So making it a test case scenario so that you can actually get on the headset, call for clearance, and take off just as a regular pilot. You are an aircraft. All you're doing is removing the man factor. So there's a lot of industry uses that we can apply with this program and bring in larger vendors. We have a letter from Boeing, Delair, DJI, and a lot of big manufacturers that are willing to partner with us with the municipality of Anchorage and state of Alaska. So there's a lot of interest in testing systems in the Arctic, which we see up north. We have NOAA, Lockheed, and a lot of the bigger manufacturers testing systems in the Arctic. But with streamlining our abilities here as a municipality, we have a huge benefit of using unmanned systems, as you will probably see here in the next presentation as well. So, did I miss anything?
Well, yeah, but I think it's appropriate for this stage. We're all missing a lot. Any questions for Ryan? I printed out the presidential order, and so I will keep the committee posted, and we'll come back to you and the FAA sort of as we learn more about this opportunity. I think the mayor, in a brief conversation with him, is interested. He may be meeting with those, so we'll see what ordinances, what cooperation, how we do this. But thank you for being here. So from that sort of general opportunity, I'd like to hear from APD about the specific way they're doing. APD they're different, right? They're not in this test, they are using the standard procedures and practices and FAAs that we have, FAA regulation that we have, and are proposing how they would use drones in their operations. And then we'll find out whether that needs ordinance changes, approval, or just our learning more about it. So Chief Dalton.
Thank you. So with me today are Captain Vandegrift and Sergeant Gilskitter, and they're going to be giving you guys a bit of information. But overall, APD's been considering this for some time and internally sort of discussing what makes sense for our agency, what makes sense for public safety for Anchorage. And we're sort of drawing to the point where we feel like we're maybe ready to start field testing this, but before we did that, we wanted to engage in some public discussion. We know there'll be community concerns. We know that elected officials are going to have concerns. So essentially, as Mr. Croft said, this all falls within the scope of the existing law, including municipal law. So this is a program that's designed to fit in within those parameters. And so today we just basically want to give you an overview of what we think would make sense for APD. So, Captain, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about this topic today. Pretty exciting technology that I think will improve public safety and officer safety, as well as increase a lot of the effectiveness and efficiencies of some of the tasks that we do as a law enforcement agency here in Anchorage. So specifically, there's a lot of slides here, so I'll talk through them quickly because I know we're on a compressed schedule. Some obvious things are that a drone, putting a camera in the air can help offer additional information for the commanders that are making decisions in tactical situations, and or improve our ability to do crime scene evidence collection.
Excuse me, would you please not use an acronym, or if you do, explain them?
Okay,
What's SUAS?
okay, it's a drone.
What's an LE?
Law enforcement.
Okay. Remember, we're nearly as dumb as we look. Certainly as we want.
Unmanned aircraft systems, what's the small s mean?
Small.
Proving his point. All right.
So throughout the rest of the conversation, we'll just call them drones because everybody knows what we're talking about. So some of the purposes of today's briefing are to hit these points. These are things that we've talked about as an agency. We've probably been having this discussion for a little over a year. And we think that we can greatly enhance our ability to investigate crimes with the use of a drone. If you think about it, we've been using cameras in law enforcement forever. Some of those cameras are handheld, some of those cameras are video, some of them are on a robot that we use in tactical situations. So a drone really is just another camera that isn't bound to the earth. It has a lot of purposes. It can help us discover evidence that maybe we couldn't see from the ground. In an example of a homicide investigation that was conducted a couple of years ago, we had information that potentially the victim the body was in a patch of woods, and so we asked the troopers to come in with Kilo 1 to give us a hand and help locating where that was, and they did, and they found it. They got in a little too close, though, and the rotor wash pretty much decimated the crime scene, so effectively moving all that evidence that was close to the body away, where if we were to use a drone today to do that, we wouldn't have that issue because it weighs about 5 pounds and the rotor wash is negligible. We really believe that it would be invaluable in investigating vehicle accidents or any type of natural disasters because we can put a camera in the air. The ability for some of the technology to 3D map is pretty amazing. So for example, if you think about a major intersection where we have a fatality accident that we're investigating, we typically close it down for hours, right? Disrupting the flow of traffic in the city. We're on the ground, we're taking photos, we're taking measurements. It takes hours to do that. With a drone, if we put a drone in the air, we can program where we want it to take photos. It can fly a grid pattern over that area. Take all those photos, feed it into some software. The software can 3D map that area to the point where we can have a very detailed sketch that's visible of that accident scene, to include the ability to map out how far items are within the picture. So pretty capable. And that technology is improving daily. So we were pretty excited about the opportunity to do that. Here's just a staged still photo from a scene where they were practicing with the drone. So search and rescue, there's certainly a lot of opportunities. Anchorage Police Department spends quite a bit of time, believe it or not, manpower in looking for missing and endangered children and adults. If you think about the east side of town, we have a lot of folks walk away into military property there. And if it happens in the wintertime, we'll typically take a quarter to half of our shift and put them on the ground, walking around looking for folks. Very inefficient. We place our officers at risk because they're falling through swamps, they're falling through ice, they're getting wet. And at the same time that they're out looking for these folks, the city still has a lot of crime that's occurring. And we've now taken a good chunk of our officers away from their ability to respond to crimes. So with a drone, we'd be able to do a grid search, and that drone would keep track of the areas that we've already searched. There's clear technology that's probably being used on the North Slope, heat seeking so that you could actually look for folks, and then tailor our manpower to go to that location and verify that that's the person you're looking for. So some pretty exciting opportunities to increase our effectiveness with regard to looking for missing and endangered adults and children. Here's a video.
Forrest, did you want to do it in the middle or at the end?
I'll wait for that.
Okay.
So apparently we didn't get the sound going, but basically you can read it. This was in, I think, North Carolina. They had a missing and endangered adult who walked away. The sheriff's department was out looking for her. As you can imagine, looking at a cornfield, very large cornfield, trying to find a human is pretty difficult. You put up a drone that cost about $1,000 and you can locate that person in minutes versus hours. So you can see the cost savings there, 25 minutes. And then they were able to get her to safety. Some drones have the capability of delivering things. I'm sure that technology will improve as time goes by. So another area where we think that a drone would be very beneficial to the Anchorage Police Department is during special operations. That is with the SWAT team or the tactical team. Again, we use a lot of different types of cameras to try and enhance our situational awareness so that the on-scene commander can make good decisions with the resources on hand. We use robots. Those robots cost about $250,000. They have a camera on it. We drive it around and we use the camera to see what's going on in an area that might be a dangerous area for a human to look into. With a drone, obviously, we can put that 360 around a structure and get good information for the tactical commander to make decisions.
Fred, what's SW?
Search warrant. So a good example is the Janami call out from last fall. We had an individual who was barricaded there and exchanging shots with the police department. He hit several of our officers. There was a barrage of fire where we believe that the suspect might have been hit inside of his residence. Because we have to do things safely, it took us probably another 12 or 18 hours to safely clear that residence and make sure that he was no longer a threat to officers, where if we'd have had a camera that we could look in a window like a drone, he was right in his living room where we suspected that he was, and he was no longer a threat. So if you think about the cost savings, we had 2 AST tactical teams, troopers, down from Fairbanks and South Central assisting us along with the FBI. Tremendous amount of resources being consumed by this one individual. We could have probably saved about 18 hours of time had we had this piece of technology vetted and in work or in place at that time. So here's an example of some footage where a department, the Lower 48, is using one of these DJI drones that are readily available at Costco right now for about $900. They have tremendously powerful camera on it. Actually, this drone that they were using was last year's generation, so I think it was a Phantom 4. They typically will place 2 drones up above a tactical situation, a critical incident that SWAT has responded to. One to videotape what's happening and provide situational awareness, because there'll be a drone operator and somebody on the radio who's relaying that information to the officers on the ground who have to make decisions. And then they'll put a second drone up in case somebody, as you can see in this situation here. There's folks that are leaving the back of the residence. The SWAT was coming in the front. They're going out the back. They actually find the gentleman that they're looking for. They have a second drone that follows that individual and vectors some SWAT officers in here in a few minutes and takes them into custody. So very efficient, effective. In addition, it records all the actions that we took so that for civil liability purposes, nobody can make false claims about what law enforcement was engaged in at the time.
They ever get shot at?
In that situation down there, they have not had anybody shoot at the drones. Mostly, they don't know they're there. They're very quiet. They weigh about 4 or 5 pounds. We've actually got an example drone here with us today. You can see they're very small, very quiet. People aren't even aware that they're up.
Eric? We'll keep going till the end. I have Forrest, Pete, and then you want to get on the list or for right now?
I'm on the list.
Okay. Go ahead, sir. Sorry.
Okay. So, in addition, there's other public safety applications for drones. There is a couple of videos we have here of a large fire that was being fought in California, and the fire chief at the time was absolutely utilizing the drone to vector all his resources, because from the air you can see the hot spots, particularly with heat-seeking cameras. And you can see in this video here is a little bit more graphic, but he was able. This is obviously late stages of the fire, but in the early stages of the fire, you can see where your hot spots are and have the ability to direct your resources where they're most efficient. So they've been used in firefighting now for some time to very good effect. I spoke to Alameda County, who kind of started their drone program back in 2015, and so they had a year's worth of data. They had 82 missions. They use those for search and rescue, they use those for tactical application, and they use those for crime scene photography. And with regard to the tactical situation, you can see his quote there, it's almost negligent to not use a drone during a high-risk tactical event because they're inexpensive and you reduce the amount of risk that you place your officers in. I'll just touch on this. I mean, obviously, if there's a law enforcement use of technology, the criminals are going to use it as well. For a number of years now, since drones have come out, folks have been using them successfully, delivered drugs, cell phones, etc., over the fences at correctional facilities across the country. ISIS in the last 18 months has been using them successfully to deliver explosives. So the military is trying to figure out counter strategies for dealing with that. But the Mexican drug cartels have taken note of that. This is recent from last month, where the Mexican federal police seized this drone, which is a low-end drone, like a $200 drone, that had some explosives wired onto it so that they could pinpoint where they want that explosion to take place. So kind of scary stuff. We recognize that there'll be reservations from many folks in the public, just some interesting cartoons that are out there on the internet right now. Here in Alaska, we have, obviously, the Alaska Constitution guarantees Alaskans the right to privacy, so that's something that we're very concerned with. We want to make sure that the whole purpose of bringing this to your attention and to talk to the public is to get those reservations and make sure we incorporate any reservations that might be out there into our policy so we can make sure we have a transparent program, so we have the ability to use this technology in a way that makes the public feel comfortable. So this poll is pretty interesting. It's a Rasmussen phone poll. American adults' questions were asked if they were opposed to the use of unmanned drones by police agencies in the U.S., and the majority do not. 25% are undecided. 36% of Americans favor the use of drones, 39 opposed. 25 are undecided. So we recognize that we need to be very, very cautious about how we utilize this technology, and that we incorporate public testimony and feedback into how we write our policy and how we actually deploy these new tools. So we believe that if we have a strong policy for the use of this technology within APD, we can overcome those obstacles. I won't read all of the bullets to you, but I can tell you that essentially we want to use this technology for 3 primary areas. 1 is evidence collection because it's so much more efficient. 2, for search and rescue because, again, it increases our effectiveness and efficiencies. And 3, for tactical events because it enhances officer safety. And those are the 3 areas that we would work in. If With regard to a tactical situation, most of the time, by the time a tactical team is in place, that's covered by a search warrant, so we'd make sure that we had search warrant protection prior to utilizing this technology. With regard to search and rescue, we obviously wouldn't need a search warrant to go out and try and help some folks. And typically, when we're doing any type of crime scene investigation, we're doing that under the auspices of a search warrant as well. So we're going to be very, very critical of who we select to utilize this technology. We're going to make sure they have good training. The chief, obviously, or his designee, will authorize each flight, including training flights, of any of these drones that we might get. Obviously, we're going to do things within the context of the law and FAA guidelines.
So can we go back to that one? 'Cause
Absolutely.
I think that goes to a lot of the concerns with it. So you're not going to do warrantless, so just with the warrant, routine patrol, that's kind of similar, right? Just scouting around rather than...
So patrol officers aren't going to have these in their trunk and just launch them when they feel like they need to get a bird's eye view of what's going on. They'll be used in a prescribed manner. We have a single entity, the technical services unit is attached to our SWAT team. They would be the primary folks who would utilize it, train, and we would call them out if we needed circumstances where we needed to find somebody who was missing or had walked away
And they
to
get-
utilize in a tactical situation or for a crime scene investigation.
That makes sense. And then in a tactical situation where there's shots being fired, somebody barricaded, danger to the public, I guess it surprises me that you get a warrant. Isn't that a situation where you wouldn't need one, or you get
That
one
would,
just
that would
in
be an
case?
exigent circumstance
Sure.
exception to having one,
Right.
yes.
There you go. So, proceed, and then we have a list of
Do you
questions
want to take
for you.
questions?
Would it be a good time? Yeah,
Well,
Mr. Dunbar.
how
and
many
then we'll go
more
ahead.
slides do you have?
I think a half dozen or so.
Okay, well, this kind of gets to the heart of what I want to talk
Good,
about.
then go ahead, yeah.
And maybe you address it in later slides, but I've read through your policy, and I really appreciate the amount of thought and depth that's obviously gone into this. And I think that as it's laid out here, if you were to give this presentation to most members of the public, they would agree with most of this. You know, search and rescue, relatively uncontroversial. You know, I think evidence collection in the right set of circumstances, like you're talking about looking aerial photos, so we don't have to rent a helicopter or whatever it is. But I think the worries about surveillance in particular and privacy are real. And when I'm looking at what you say here are the prohibited acts, I don't really see those laid out clearly in this policy. Now maybe I just sort of missed it, but when I'm looking at this, I see on page, you don't have page numbers, but under 2A, big Roman numeral 2, subsection A, subsection 9, is where you start talking about the need for a search warrant. And to me, the language here is a little bit maybe weaker than I'd like to see. There are things in here about reasonable expectation of privacy, for example, which is a very controversial phrase that gets into things like curtilage and tiny constables and tons of Fourth Amendment law right now. And it also is sort of a shifting standard, because what's reasonable expectation of privacy now versus, well, if there's drones buzzing everywhere, then nobody can be reasonably expected not to get viewed by them, right? And so I guess as looking at this policy, I'd like to see it this more explicitly lined out there. And this language in number 9 strengthened so that it's clear that, you know, basically I'd like you to, rather than say what's prohibited, say, here are the circumstances where we will use this, and only in these circumstances. You know, search and rescue, force protection and special operations, crime scene investigation, and with a warrant. You know, and that's kind of what I think you've laid out. But being very explicit, here are the only times we will use this, and otherwise it is prohibited. And that there are very strong, there's very strong language there about not engaging in this kind of activity without a warrant, because I think that is going to be a very big concern in the public. The second, like, sort of overall point that I'd like to make, and so you've talked about the FAA regulations, and is there an ordinance that already deals with this that I'm just not aware of? Is there already specific language that's limiting your ability to do these things? Okay, our former city attorney is shaking his head no.
We don't have any ordinance regarding drones.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then I would like to, over the course of the next however many weeks or months, to work with the APD to develop an ordinance so that, you know, I have great respect for your leadership team and for the work you've done here, but I'd like to see something in law that lays out some of these protections for the public a little more explicitly. And says, here are when the APD can use it, and here are when they can't. And if APD, and I apologize, I'm sort of monologuing here, but if there are times when APD realizes there's no necessary reason we really need to use this, then come back to the assembly and then we'll definitely have that public participation, and we could write it back into the law. I guess, Chief, do you have any thoughts on? I apologize, it was kind of a long diatribe. But
Do you
have
want
any
him to
thoughts
repeat
on
his
that?
question?
Yeah, my thoughts are.
I'll never remember it.
How do you feel about making it more explicit? Here's when you can use it. Here's when you can't. And then how do you feel about putting it into ordinance, not just having a policy?
Two things. So, with regards to policy, I'm always very conscious that whenever we write a policy, it's very difficult to encapsulate every potential circumstance that could ever happen. So there's a constant balance, and it doesn't matter if it's a drone policy or, you know, a uniform policy or anything in between in the police department. We're always balancing, making sure that we're giving really clear parameters for officers to do their jobs and the expectations under which we expect them to do that. But we're also giving them enough flexibility out in the world where we can't anticipate every outcome to do those jobs. So with policy, I'm always being mindful of that balance. I don't mind putting a little bit more clear definition that kind of goes to this slide as far as what our expectations are, what the current authorized uses of drones are. I don't object to that. I just want to make sure that we don't so restrict it that we have some emergency situation and our officers feel restricted from making what, you know, anybody would look at later and say, well, that was a reasonable decision. So, you know, and I think, frankly, my answer is almost the same for putting it into law, just because that process clearly is a little bit more burdensome when it comes to making alterations. And so if we have something that is overly restrictive, it can cause operational problems. And I think you kind of get that. I mean, there's sort of a military perspective there as well. So it's not that I'm opposed to either one of those things. I just want to make sure that we're careful that we're observing that balance, and we leave it in a balanced state that allows people to make reasonable decisions under adverse circumstances and get their jobs. Does that make sense?
I have a number of questions, but Ryan texted me the state law on it. So there's no municipal ordinance that we know of. There's a state law, 1865-900, use of unmanned aircraft systems, and it mainly says that a law enforcement agency, it has some other provisions, but basically, if a law enforcement agency is going to use it, they have to adopt procedures. So they're following state law to say, but it has some other restrictions. So I hadn't known that until now. I'll get that for the committee. We can look, and it retains, as sometimes the legislature does not do, but it retains our home rule powers, so we can decide if we want to add or, I'm not sure we can subtract, but anyway, we could add.
Yep.
So I'll get that to the committee, yeah.
Generally, I tend to agree with what you're saying. We just want to make sure that's the whole reason that we're having the public discussion about this instead of just doing it and dealing with it later. I want to make sure that all those concerns are addressed. I don't think it makes sense for the police department to try to be maintaining public safety through methods that the public frankly doesn't agree with.
Mr. Peterson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so it seems like what you're saying is that the department is going to develop a policy instead of having the assembly put a statute together. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, the department's going to develop a policy regardless of what else happens. I mean, that's any policy the department has is just a general set of guidelines for officers to follow as they carry out their day-to-day operations, or for special circumstances like SWAT or drone use, stuff like that. So we're going to end up with a policy regardless of what action the assembly might take. You know, the thing that I like about the way APD is currently doing policy is I feel like we're pretty responsive, that if circumstances change or we learn things through operation, we have the ability to adapt to that and modify policy so it makes the most sense for not just the way the officers are doing their job, but whatever the community's current concerns are. I don't know, if the assembly decides to take action, obviously that is the assembly's prerogative. I would just be, I guess my only comment on that would be, if whatever the outcome is very restrictive and there's a lengthy process to make change, that would be a concern, just because this technology is, like any technology, but especially this has really been developing quickly over the last couple of years. And I would just want to make sure that we're able to adapt to that, to whatever that change might be. And there might be some change to that policy that technology that we can't see today coming, but that further increases people's privacy concerns. And maybe we want to be able to adapt to that quickly, or whatever else it is.
Just want to do
Yeah.
something? Thank you. So, and if we're going down a list of potential uses, I happen to think that, and I'm not sure logistically how this would work, but one of the more dangerous parts of an officer's job is when they get into a high-speed pursuit, chasing a suspect. And I was thinking possibly you might be able to use a drone for that. So,
That is a potential use. That's not something that we have listed right away, just because that's something that would require the equipment to already be in the field with an authorized user to be able to deploy quickly. I'm not saying that maybe at some point we might not get to that, but APD has a long history of incorporating new technology in the law enforcement realm very slowly. When I was new, and it is kind of funny, but it's not a bad thing either. So when I was new, pepper spray was kind of the new thing, and they had just brought that on. And that started off with just a few people who had been to a lot of training, and they were on the SWAT team, and they were the only ones that had it. And then that would sort of slowly grew out from there, and then ultimately, the rest of the department adopted it, and it's a totally normal thing that all patrol officers carry. And then, we did the same thing with tasers. When Taser first came out, we got a couple of them. The SWAT team tested and developed them, and then there were only a couple of authorized users, and they were only authorized in sort of these higher risk situations. And then ultimately, as everybody, including the community, became more comfortable with that technology, we sort of deployed it further and further. There's a potential that we could do something similar with this technology, but because I know that there's going to be significant public concern, I would prefer that we just start slowly and sort of work our way into it. And so that's why you see kind of this structure that we have now, where it's a very limited number of users at the police department that are actually authorized to do it. And then as we become comfortable with the policy, we become comfortable with the equipment, the community decides, yeah, this is something we're okay with. Yeah, conceivably you could, expand into something like that. We're just not talking about doing it yet. I'd rather sort of follow the crawl, walk, run method of implementing something.
Okay.
We're still very much at the crawl stage.
Yeah, I want to do this as completely as everybody wants. It's a legitimate area of public concern. We did start a little late, and I do want to have time for the Public Safety Advisory Commission. Mr. Trini.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. I appreciate the public procedure manual, but it's starting to smell like an executive order. The present issues. That doesn't work in this government here. Public procedures manual only applies to the executive branch. It does not apply to the branch of government, which is the assembly. I want to make sure if we do something like this, it's done by ordinance. Because I know this says it does not deal with civil law. My concern is we've got a drone out there flying. I've got a lot of friends that have 12 gauges. They can take one of those down. So what I want to have is legislation written in here. If one is taken down, the person can be charged with shooting an instrument of police protection. So I think we do need an ordinance. I'm not in favor of having executive order after executive order. Call on policy procedure manual if you want. I want it to do by ordinance, so that way we get the public's comment on it in front of the assembly. That's the way we do things here. Thank you, Eric.
You bet. I had me, but up to the last. So Mr. Steele, Mr. Constant, and then Mr. Musk. Mr. Steele.
Yeah, I think it's a great technology, and I think you'll find a lot of uses for it as you get more experience with it, get out there. My concern is pretty much everybody else's, I think, in terms of surveillance, I guess, is the issue that I wanted to bring up in terms of if somebody is involved in a crime and you knew it ahead of time, you could get a warrant and have it up. If a crime is in progress, I wouldn't want you to be hampered to not be able to use it to either pursue them or to find them or to help you in apprehending somebody in a crime that's being taken. But this balance in terms of what we put in an ordinance, what we have in an ordinance, has to be offset with operational need, I think. And as we get more experience with it, the public will be more concerned with it. But I can see all kinds of great opportunities for the use of it. Not only searching for lost people, but maybe even observing a suspect. I have a daughter that lives on the east side who you had an officer that was staked out watching a particular criminal for a couple of days. I guess it was out there, and it seems to me that a drone might be helpful in that in some respect too. So we need to get the experience with it. So we need to be flexible. But yes, we do need an ordinance. Yes, you also need a policy that uses it most effectively in whatever operations it could be you're conducting. So we'll learn as we get experience with this.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. Two things. This list of prohibited acts, it seems like you could add this under section B, just straight over, if this is what you're thinking, that actually gets us real close. And I'm on the opposite mind of Mr. Dunbar, that we shouldn't probably try to come up with a comprehensive list of all uses, but a list of restrictions, and then let the uses define themselves over time and maybe review those uses. That way we don't hamper unnecessarily the potential uses, but at the same time we're very clear about what's not okay. And that is kind of my bias. I'm supportive of an ordinance. And question on the warrants. Does the warrant have to have specific language authorizing the use of a drone?
We would
Probably,
request
yeah.
that in the application for the warrant. Once we have a program, we would mention that in there.
Whether it would require it, it'd be a good idea.
Yeah, that's
just
where
cover
it's
it.
gonna go is, you'd have to probably ask a district attorney or a prosecutor if it required it, but we'd probably put it in there just to make sure it was expressly authorized.
Would be good here from the Department of Law.
Yeah, so I would just add that to part B right there, and you probably solve a lot of concern.
Ms. Dombrowski?
Oh, I thought you were.
Yeah, I just, in terms of surveillance, it just seems to me, sometimes that's a quick and dirty thing that you need. And the question is, do you need a warrant to be able to use it for surveillance?
Our state constitution.
Anyway,
I wanted this discussion. I'm not sure I wanted the whole debate, but yeah, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I think there's a real potential value here to policing using this technology. That might shock some, but I do believe it. But I think you're going to be in the same catch-22, Mr. Constant, whether you try to define the allowable uses or try to define the prohibited uses. Because there's always going to be scenarios that creep up that you look at late in hindsight, or you look at the moment and say, oh, we shouldn't be doing this, or oh, we should be doing this. And so I think to Mr. Dunbar's point, I'm very partial to, I was thinking the exact same thing you were thinking, but there's a caveat I think you could build into an ordinance that would basically give okay, here's all the things we're going to use it for, but if something comes up that we don't predict, the police chief and the city manager, the police chief and the mayor have to sign off on it. You kind of cover your bases in that regard, where there is a level of oversight, and it's outside of the police department, but it has the police department involved. Whether it's a police chief or the deputy police chief, or do you know what I'm saying? So there might. So that's just one thought. I just throw that out there. Just chew on that. And sorry.
No, you had another one? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have many thoughts, but I'm not gonna. Yeah, but the other thing I want to say is, when it comes to the use of drone technology, I think it definitely should not be just limited to the police department, because with the fire department, I saw this with a fire we had in Eagle River Valley up Highland Road just a summer or two ago. It started down on a riverbank. It was hard to get to. It was a remote location. But being able to deploy something like that, you could really clearly see where you needed your fire alarms to be. And I think that would have been a technology. Forestry came in and all that, but it would be a technology that the fire department could utilize, especially in the remote regions in my area. And the same goes with, it was many years ago, but there was a lost vulnerable adult out in Chugiak. And APD arrives on scene, and they didn't really know the area. So effectively, it was CVFD and the community patrol that were able to come in to help because they knew the terrain in the area. But imagine if they could have had a drone that they could have deployed to try to find that gentleman. I think in those situations, I think there's definitely an applicable use. But I'll just go on the record right now. I have no desire to see code enforcement use drones at all. So let's just put that out there, Mr. Palsy.
Yes.
Don't even get it in your mind.
Something is too effective enforcement. Yeah, Mr. President.
Can I just really quickly? So I agree with you on the fighting fire, and I know that when I was in wildland firefighting, we used helicopters with the heat cameras you're talking about, and drones would be much cheaper. So I definitely see that much cheaper. But I think that this is. I think you probably, unfortunately for you, Chief, you see that there is a lot of desire to have an ordinance. Probably, maybe not universal, but if there is, then I think we might start talking about having, much like we do with cell towers, a subcommittee that works on this and develops an ordinance working with the administration and with the police department and with the fire department. They want to be involved as well, and having a real drone policy for the city that's set out in law. And I think that Mr. Bossi's idea about some kind of relief valve using the mayor and the whatever, I think it's a good idea, so long as it's capped in time. That is, you do it this one time, but you have to come back to the assembly and get the law changed if you want to keep doing it. Otherwise, we have something like we have right now where, well, I won't go into it, but you get one broad law and then you use it to fight a bunch of wars that weren't originally, authorized. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
That went a little far afield. Great. So, yeah, it seems like police, they've talked about the exciting possibilities. Fire was mentioned in the slide, and absolutely. And then I've talked briefly with MLNP, was interested in it.
Parks
The port
Department.
is interested in it. Parks, Joe Rogers here.
And I'll
Yeah.
say, we even had a work session now 7 months ago where we introduced how some of our enterprises and utilities are using drones. And those folks, some of them are represented here in the audience, and we're going to pivot to the executive order. We're going to ask each of them to do a little show and tell there too. We put APD in a special category because we did recognize that there is a strong business case in terms of officer safety, public safety, and no kidding, bottom line, that there are different considerations here, and we want to do that very much thoughtfully and with eyes open, with total transparency. But you were right; there are lots of different ways that drones can be helpful to us as we.
Problem bears.
Training.
We'll struggle with, and your point of don't write too many of current procedures in a fast-moving technology, and don't write too restrictive a thing for us to respond to situations. We hear you on that. The notes I had, and then we can move on to the Public Safety Committee. Really interesting discussion on whether you write a positive or a negative law. Through law, like the Ten Commandments is the archetypal one of the first laws, and it's all phrased in "thou shalt not." It's so much easier to know. I told you not to murder, and you murdered. Than I told you to be a good person, and what does that mean? So a negative. It's why most of our laws are phrased, criminal laws at least, in the negative. It's so much easier to tell you what not to do than how to be a good person or how to do good drone conduct or police behavior. So typically we say what not to do. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult. And have you had discussions with the ACLU about their concerns?
We have. We met with them recently, and Sergeant Hulsketter has done a tremendous amount of work on this and really developing our written policy. And that was done based on ACLU guidelines. And then we, like I said, we met with them very recently and went over this and listened to what their concerns are. And they actually pointed out some things that we hadn't considered previously, and so those are being incorporated as well. So it's been, open discussion there as well.
Good. We'll look for this. We'll try and help and not hurt. Hippocratic oath of the Assembly. Yes, Mr. Well.
So, if you use dash cams, do they have the same issues here? Do you have a policy?
We do have a policy for dash cams, but they are not as controversial as drones. So, but we've had dash cams in police cars sort of sporadically for decades, and pretty much in every single one for the last 5 years.
Okay. I don't want to drone on and on. Let's move if we can. Thank you all for your presentation, and particularly, as was said a couple of times, for the obvious thought and care you put into it. So we appreciate it. I'd like to move on to the Public Safety Advisory Commission. We have representatives from the commission here. If you guys, can you come up over there? We'd love to have you at the table. And if you just stand there, it'd be uncomfortable for you after a while.
Mr. Chairman, there's also one on the phone.
Good. I'll get them all introduced. Oh, they were here for that. I will do that as a follow-up. I'm just gonna do this.
If you were here just to talk about drone use, we can catch that another time.
Yeah, I apologize. Other municipal entities on drone use will have you back when we have more.
We have an ordinance in front of us.
We have two.
When you have an ordinance
When I
on
have,
drones,
yes, that's right.
then we
So,
have them here.
Mr. Moore, right? David Moore?
Yes.
Yeah. And you're the vice chair now?
Right.
Mr. Danger, Nick Danger is the current chair, yes?
Yes, sir.
And then we have Sharon online? Or
There's
who?
two Sharons on the commission.
Two Sharons online?
No, there's two on the commission, so
We have one online.
And we need to.
I bet it's, I bet
Which
it's.
Sharon do we have online?
Sharon Schmar.
Good, okay. We want to thank you all for your service. And we have two different drafts of different approaches. I want to say from my perspective, but speaking for at least some of the assembly that I've talked to, this is not a specific dissatisfaction with particular members of the commission now, certainly not with the ones that are before us. I think you guys have been very active. It is that we have a range of advisory commissions. They have a range of how active and effective they are. And yeah, I'll give you a thing. And so some are not very effective at all, and we're trying to look at those and see what it'll take. Better communication, restructuring, maybe we don't need that commission, all that, because we want them, we want your time to be, your valuable time to be used well. And it's my preference that things get, my bias preference, that things that are too large, and I think 9 may be too large, that a 7-member or a 5-member commission is easier to get quorums and to handle. And so that's why the discussion had been, and I was tasked by the chairman to present 2 different proposals. One that had been advocated by Mr. Dyson, but I see these are both mine, but that's fine. Let's just re-up you, or let's change the configuration of it, change the membership, maybe change some of the, both membership in terms of number from 9 to 7, and maybe in terms of we'd like a prosecutor here, or we'd like somebody from the victims' rights community, or whatever. And that's all very generally described here. Ms. Domboski, can you catch us up on some of what you've done on this issue recently?
Sure. So I first want to thank the chair for assigning me to be the liaison between the Assembly and the Public Safety Advisory Commission. I attended the meeting they had just this month, and I have to tell you, I was really impressed. They had already had an agenda in which they are looking at the Anchorage Safety Patrol and the service areas and the clientele. There was a lot of discussion around that. This has been something that in the past, Mr. Trainee, Ms. Gray Jackson, and I have worked on. So it's definitely a need, and they're focused on specifically researching that topic and coming forward to the Assembly and the Mayor's office with a proposal on that. And that was, so that I was really impressed to hear the level of discussion. I think really the bottom line comes in what I took away from that meeting is we have very engaged commissioners that are actually dealing with real topics and trying to, I don't know that there's ever been a link to help them funnel their energies into a productive working relationship with the Assembly. I think in the past they have had the understanding that, you know, they would look at stuff and send recommendations. They do have resolutions and they bring up action items, but they would go directly to the mayor's office. And I think there was even a comment that I was the first Assembly member they'd actually seen come to their commission meeting. And so I think from my perspective, I think coming down with a sledgehammer when in fact we just need to open up the lines of communication is probably counterproductive, because if I would have shown up and seen a commission that was half there, that really wasn't engaging in real topic and just, you know, basically shooting the breeze, I would come back with something different. But I was very impressed. So what I can tell you, and I'll let them speak to it more, already they've been asking me, okay, well, how do we get information on this particular topic that we're interested in? And the fire chief and I were both there, and we had great conversations in facilitating that information. They're looking at run volumes, they're looking at service areas, they're looking at not only short-term solutions for the high volume of calls to the service center, but they're looking at long-term solutions, like potentially looking at the demographics and saying, do we need a different location for the service center? Do we need, so they really are looking at it, I think, from a variety of ways, and I personally appreciated that. And I think a big part of that conversation came because there's so many commissioners with so many different backgrounds. So they're kind of looking at the problem differently, but holistically. So I personally am of the mind now, especially after being after that commission meeting, that I think the commission should have the opportunity to continue in their current configuration. I think you're going to see for our first quarter budget revisions time frame in April, March or April. I think they're going to have an actual formal report and recommendation for the service patrol issue that they're starting to work on now. So I personally think it's a good thing.
Has there been a difficulty getting a quorum to conduct business of the commission? Has that been difficult?
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, we've had a couple of issues with that. We have a core group that is there every meeting, doesn't ever miss a meeting.
How big? I mean, is
Well,
that
5, 6 of us are generally there all the time.
Well, if you had 5, you have a quorum.
Correct.
But I've understood both from you and others that it has not had a quorum
Well,
for some
when we
time.
get towards summer, we have a problem with everybody's going on fishing
Sure.
and vacation and blah, blah,
Well, I thought
blah.
you didn't even meet during the summer.
We don't, we stopped for 2 months. And
Okay.
So we went to the 3rd month this summer, and we didn't get a quorum. Because it was.
When's the last time you've had a quorum?
We had one at the last meeting.
Before that?
Oh, the winter, we do really well. We're full. Everybody shows up. Just the summer, we had a couple of times. But
Years ago,
it's not bad.
when I was the chair, we did have many meetings where we didn't have quorum, and it did create a problem. And
Couldn't approve the minutes because you didn't have a quorum.
couldn't
for
approve the
last one.
minutes. We couldn't pass a resolution. We did. What we'd have is we'd have a work session basically, and we would discuss things. And I thought those meetings were still powerful. It's just that we couldn't accomplish much with it, and we were waiting on the city to get another member assigned to us, and
That was a couple years ago?
Yeah, and it was quite a lag there, but they caught us up, and now we're running pretty good. But you know, when we're sitting there with 5 members, one person doesn't show up, and then we don't have a quorum, so it was kind of an issue. But I personally don't feel, I'm with Amy as far as I personally, the configuration of more is better than less, just because what we're doing is we're tapping into more variety of opinions on issues that I think we need to have more resources, because oftentimes we'll have people on our commission that have really deep information on certain issues, and more people that we have, better chance of something like that happening. My opinion is that it's probably more about vetting the proper people to be on the commission, that they're the kind of people that would be committed to being there once a month. And they're all, you know, they're not paid, and it's a volunteer thing, and so it enters into, well, how much time do I want to put in? And I think that commissioners definitely should be given that latitude, you know, that this is, what are you expecting from me? I don't know if that might be the reason why people don't show up, or.
And in the last 3 years, we've only had 2 times where we didn't have a quorum. And generally, and what he's saying too, is we get a new member, they come to the first meeting, and then we don't see them for a year. So we need to speed that up, and that's through the municipality, of trying to remove them, get another.
And we actually did remove a member at one point.
Do you have a list of members to remove now?
I think we're good right now. Well, we have one that's not attending many meetings, and then one just retired and moved out of state, Ray.
And
at his
I
last
always
meeting.
had the impression that there was somebody that, at the city level, that was monitoring that. In other words, that if we were taking attendance.
You didn't think it was your job to tell them that they would
Right.
just do it? Yeah.
I didn't feel like, when I was the chair, that it was my job to call people up and say, hey, get in here, you need to be at the meeting. I didn't feel that was my option.
In our bylaws, we're not allowed to remove anybody. It has to be done through the mayor's office and the commission,
Right.
not us.
Couple of questions, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are the members of your commission, are they allowed to call in if they
Correct,
can't be
yes,
there
we have it set up
physically?
for like Sharon's doing right now on the phone.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Dice?
Thank you. As I read through your mission statement. It certainly says there that part of your job is paying attention to what's going on with public safety and crime, so on and so forth in our community. As I read about your activities, it looked to me like you guys have been kind of focused on and doing a pretty good job with community interface, community patrol, information stuff and so on. But initially and ignorantly, I was disappointed that there was nothing there that you guys had alerted us or knew that this huge issue with drugs was going on and so on and so forth in our community. So it's close to being a criticism, but an observation on something I thought you guys would have noticed and come to us with or given us a heads up. I enjoy your comments on that.
Well, we basically, and I've been the chair for a couple of years now, I've been on the board for a while. We were basically told that we, and we're put on the ground people really good. Every meeting, monthly meeting, we have to go, we got a fire station. We're supposed to go check our fire station every month. We do ride-alongs with the police. And we go to any of the activities we can, so we talk to them. That's where we get our information. This is not good, this is bad. And we got a huge thing on the spice and everything. So we were told, or what I've taken out of it is I'm supposed to, we do a letter of resolution and send it to the mayor's office, not directly to you guys, because we're appointed by the mayor. So that's where the communication is sent.
Don't worry, I straightened them out on that one, you
Yeah,
guys.
and that's
But
where
you're
it
confirmed by
was.
us.
I was under that impression,
I
so I
love
might have
that.
been wrong.
Yeah, so if I may continue.
Yes, please.
So as I looked at the auditor's report and so on and so forth, I didn't see that that there was a record that in your reports of having done those kind of things about this epidemic of drug-related property crimes and so on. Are you saying that you did and that went to the mayor?
That would be our minutes, and then sometimes we do a resolution and a letter, we'll send that to the mayor's office. When we have something that's big, because the police would come in and talk about the spice problem and the fire department and the number of runs and all that.
Yeah.
So we would get together and then we would write a letter and send something there.
Yeah, so.
That's what I was under the impression we were
Yeah.
supposed to do.
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess I would ask you to ask the mayor's office if there's an in-place procedure or something so that when they get these reports from the commission, that when it's relevant or something, that we hear about it.
Probably all the time, but yeah, I'm making a note to ask for the attendance at the meetings and any reports they've given over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and in your place, I might think about a link whereby your committee or we could direct or ask the commission to look into X and report on Y. And of course, we owe the mayor's office kind of a courtesy and to tell them that we want that, you know, and the mayor's interest cannot be different than ours at all, you know. So, anyways, thank you.
Mr. Trainee.
Nora, are you the staff support to this
I recently became.
committee? Huh?
Correct. Yep.
So, do you attend all their meetings?
I missed one, but then I think it was canceled, but I have since I become the staff.
So if they've got a vacancy, would they come to you to ask George or whoever to fill it, or how would they get the vacancies filled?
Yes, I can help facilitate that. I know also the mayor's office is constantly looking at the boards and commissions list. I think right now there's a transition happening between who in the mayor's office is handling that list, but I would work with the syndication office, that the deputy chief of staff, who kind of manages all of those.
If you take a look into it, because they said there's one member that's moved out of state.
Right, I know that one moved out of state, and then I think that one may be coming off of the commission. I think that she talked to someone in the administration about it, so as far as I know, they would have 2 vacancies.
It's just important to us that we make sure these are staffed completely. Well, the mayor does appoint, that somebody confirms. So believe me, we do have a communication. It's our fault that we weren't communicating with you too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Amy, did you want back on?
Yeah, I just didn't get a chance to I wanted the chair to discuss this because this is something I didn't know they did that I found was actually exciting, which is a step beyond which other boards and commissions don't necessarily do. But you guys actually assign each of your commissioners to a fire station, and you have regular communications. Can you expand on that and tell people what you do as commissioners?
Well, what we do is we email the, whoever the captain, whoever's in charge of the station, and then we have a meeting with them, and we usually do a roundtable with them, and talk to the regular firefighters and the paramedics and everybody, and then we just take their grievances of what's going on, what are we missing? The maintenance building needs to be replaced. There's too many calls in South Anchorage. We're picking up all the work for ASP. We're never getting any rest, and that. And then, again, we also do the ride-along with the police department, and we try to stay with the guys on the route. That's what we're trying to find out is the route. We're the boots on the ground. So they tell us, and then we come to the meeting, we all talk about it, talk to the chiefs that attend the meeting, and then pass our information on.
So Nick, would that be fair to say, specifically the meeting that I attended where I watched the discussion unfold about the high levels of inebriate calls in the Diamond area, is that where that came from, where you guys?
Yes, that was from visit to Station 12, because
Okay.
they were just livid about it, and I understand that. I mean, that's what they're doing, it's just out the door and back, and it's just like, holy moly.
One of our commissioners actually got data and printed out maps, and you weren't at that meeting, but, and identifying that problem. So it was a continuation of the discussion that we'd had the meeting before. Nick Hornshoe was the commissioner that actually was more in communication with the fire department and finding out this information and brought it to us.
Sure.
That
And
kind of thing happens all the time.
well, and I found, this is what I was talking about, is this was an issue that I personally was aware about, I recognized, but to see the commission was already a step or two ahead in getting the data, and they've gone into, and that's how I get a lot of my information too, is you talk to line guys, and they tell you. But part of my role is to help explain to them how the assembly interfaces with other boards and commissions. So for example, I explained, the fuel tax, or if I have an issue that I want the Budget Advisory Commission to look at, I might draft a resolution, or I might go to the commission meeting and say, hey, listen, this is an issue I'm concerned about. I'd like to get your feedback, whether it's on an ordinance or whether it's on the topic, to give me ideas how to solve it. And I think that's what we could do with this commission, but nobody's ever gone there and done that. And so that's where I'm at. I'm at this point with this commission where I feel like, and I told them, I told them I would get information about this particular topic. It's going to be dated from a couple of years, but there's been some studies done on it. And I would share it with them because it's right for the topic they're talking about. But they're interested in coming back to the assembly in the spring with a recommendation. And I kind of help them understand that, listen, we're not going to get in for this budget cycle, but for first quarter budget revisions, we may be able to. So that, they really just needed a little bit of help in formulating how they're going to get that communication to us and how it might look. I don't know what it'll look like, but how that vehicle will look. Does that make sense?
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, the good thing to understand is that Amy's presence is going to help a lot in the communication, because every meeting, the start of the meeting, we give reports on either our committees or, in this case, activities, and so it's a good communication link to the assembly, and I think we all need to take advantage of it both directions. So thank you.
And we're looking forward to it, because we're a great asset for you, because again, we're doing
I
something that
agree.
you guys aren't doing. And to have that information, we always get follow up, and we want to push it out, and we don't have the revenue.
Mr. Chair, I didn't make my final point. If I can, then I won't get back to the queue. No, it's okay. I just wanted to say, I gave them the example too, when we have our Budget and Finance Committee meetings, we have an item on the agenda for the Budget Advisory Commission. So we have them attend our Finance Committee. So I recommended to them that whether it's the chair or vice chair, or whether they rotate, they have a member of their commission attend our Public Safety Committee meetings too, because I think it'll do the same thing as what the Budget Advisory Commission does. I think it'll help integrate the commission with the actual working body of the assembly.
Closing comments on any of the three issues, or I put out for, I think everybody saw, but if not, a draft agenda for both this meeting and the meeting in December 6th, and then I keep an optional mid-month meeting that I've been using more and more, and would like to use in December for December 20th. So on December 6th, we'll have the crime update from Chief Dahl. I'm going to try and schedule a discussion of the bail schedule that all of us have discussed some, but Mr. Dyson and I most, and I'm going to try and invite the presiding judge, or at least have some information from the presiding judge. It's a little bit of division of powers or separation of powers, but I think just saying what was intended and what the process is, and certainly the municipal prosecutor on that. There's some things happening with community work service between Parks and the prosecutors, so having Mr. Rada and Ms. Thino there. That's for the 6th. And then the 20th was going to be concentrating on a presentation on opiate and heroin use and what we know about it. We had a preliminary presentation on that a couple of months ago. I visited the methadone treatment clinic and some others. So what beds we have, what option we have, the difficulty that I didn't know how difficult it was to get off heroin and how that makes such a problem. Essentially, methadone is a way to stay on a drug for the rest of your life to avoid going physically off heroin. But so a big discussion of that. We heard previously that we had gone as a state from having about half the national average of heroin deaths to about 3 times over the past 4 or 5 years. And there's just a lot of good evidence to suggest we are in the midst of a heroin epidemic. It's hard because nobody registers that and stands up and says, I'm a heroin user, but looking at deaths, looking at the amount of needles that are going through the needle exchange, looking at the amount that Chief Dahl seizes and the officer sees, all those data points lead you to the probability that we have a whole bunch more heroin use than we used to. And finally, in December, if we have time, the discussion we've had a little bit of whether and in what situations we would pursue a felony prosecution with our own staff when we think it's appropriate and the state has turned it down. It's obviously we think it should be, and that person should be charged as a felony. Our people think it should. But if we just do that for the state, are we just assuming something the state should be doing? So Ms. Thino on that, and I'll be talking to the new municipal attorney as well. So I have Mr. Trainee and Mr. Constant.
Eric, since we're at this meeting, we're talking about this commission. I'm afraid we're just leaving the commission the way it is right now. Part of the problem is our lack of communication with them not understanding the relationship with us. I think we've cleared that up. So I'm just in favor of keeping the commission the way it currently exists.
I'm still not as convinced that it's as functional as it should be, but I'm willing to have my mind changed. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you. The clerk on a separate topic handed out 2 graphics for me, and I didn't know where they should fit today because it's kind of a crazy day. And it's a couple of publications by the Rio Grande Project out of Salt Lake City. Some of the key new efforts that they're putting together. And so I don't know, there's obviously no time now. It's not on the agenda for the next meeting, but I want you all to understand what this is. It's a strategic plan for what they're doing there. And their Housing First programs are separate from this. They're only part of what they're doing, but they really are focused on public safety and restoring order as their first order of business in making sanity return back to their community. And so it's a conversation I hope that we can start to have. And here's some beginnings for everybody to start to look and see what can be done.
Excellent. We have
Work is on there.
Chris, I've got more information from.
We have a joint committee meeting next. I want to give it time for
Can I ask a
transition. Is
question?
that you just did?
I know I need to ask another one though, because I feel like you're leaving me wanting. So, no jokes. So we have these 2 ordinances in front of you, in front of us. You asked us to consider them, and
It was the other way around. I was asked to draft.
oh, okay. So they're both in front of us, and we've been asked to look at them both. And your comment that you haven't been convinced, though, I just want to ask: are you willing to give them a shot?
I want to get the data about, and arguably should have for this meeting, but how often they had a quorum, what reports they've actually been giving, and so get sort of the data. I appreciate you visiting the commission, but I'd like to know how functional they are, and the number of times in particular they've had a quorum. I mean, if we're an 11-member body, if we have a 9-member body advising us, I was surprised it was that large.
I think the BAC is the same. Is the BAC 9 or 11? I can't remember. So it's not unique.
So I'm going to get some more data on it.
So you just want to wait?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions, business to come before the committee? Mr. Gates?
Yes, I just want to mention timing. Currently, IO 2017-61 sent the Public Safety Advisory Commission to terminate January 18, 2018. So if one of these ordinances need to pass in order to change that, January 9th, it needs to be introduced December 19th. So
We'll have one introduced, I'm sure, before that.
December 19th introduction is our deadline.
What's that?
Or both.
That's debate.
Appreciate that. With nothing more, we'll adjourn this, and right after this is the joint homelessness and public safety.
So you're starting that.